Good morning, Joe Winberg, Bluebird, Semaphore, World History for Ordinary People 42. This will be about India. And so, wherever we left off last time, who knows, and this is not a linear description of Indian history, but I want to start off by saying the first couple of 100 years of Europeans in India was pretty much the bailiwick of the Portuguese and the Dutch. But starting around 1700, the British enter under the disguise of the East Indian Company. And they start out slowly, taking little steps. And it seems that their MO becomes to get themselves closely aligned with some ruler of some petty kingdom. So it would be some petty ruler, and they get themselves aligned with that guy and that guy's good graces. And then they would find out who he's having a problem with. And they would volunteer to jointly go after that other petty ruler in his petty kingdom, and they would go there and they would beat them down. And then in the ensuing treaties and arrangements, the East India Company would get more trade rights, and these things were somewhat guaranteed, and they added to their net worth. And so they just went throughout India over a period of 50 years doing these small wars almost constantly. Petty rulers, petty kingdoms, but in the aggregate, they all added up till eventually Britain was pretty much having the lion's share of India. And at some point up there in the later 18th century, or maybe early 19th century, I'm not sure, England decides to give up on this East India Company and go totally national. In other words, this makes this a British colony. So, by those actions, England gets a big time piece of colonial land. So my main interest in all of this was to get to the mutiny, the famous mutiny, which is in and around 1857, 1858. But before I could get there, I had to slosh through all these, minor kingdom wars, and with these know-nothing rulers, not know-nothing, but essentially small-time kingdoms, small-time rulers, and we had to slosh through it. It was very boring because every page was a repeat of the page before it. Just the names had changed and the places, but everything was the same thing. The English routed, the other guys ran, and then they had prisoners, and then they did this, and there were some atrocities, and they raided the walls, and the walls came down, and then it went on some more, and they had elephants, and they had all this gore and what have you. And that went on for 50 pages. It was very boring. But I started to get close to the time frame, and it was still far away, of the Great Mutiny. And I'm coming to find out that there was mutinies all over the place. And basically, these mutinies were the native troops would say, "That's it. I'm done with supporting you British guys. I'm going to go and riot. I'm going to go and revolt against you." And those were the mutinies. And usually the way they went is, in the beginning, because of the surprise element, the native forces would kill a lot of British people, soldiers, civilians, and so on. Then once the British were able to pull themselves together, they'd wipe out the mutineers. And that's the way that went on for quite some time. But as I keep reading and reading, there's a section that's going to be the First Burmese War. And then a couple of chapters later, there's going to be another one, a Second Burmese War. And I'm starting to get excited, because nothing gets me more excited than the intrigues of Southeast Asia. And certainly Burma is high on that list. Of course, it's not called Burma anymore. It's called Myanmar or something like that. Well, anyway, Burma is situated on the east coast of the Bay of Bengal, way up on that bay, and way down, too. I mean, it's quite a long country, Burma. And up at the top of that bay, here's good old Burma sitting there, and pieces of India come down on that coast, lining up with Burma, and across the bay is Bangladesh. You got Bangladesh, you got India, further up the coast, you got China. And if you go along that coast more and more, you got, in those days, it was Siam, you know, and what I got from that is, and this was always constant warfare up there, always, and people needing to flee, and you know, all the atrocities of human, what do you call it today? The human whatever. And I attribute all this troubles to that they packed too many countries together up there. You know, so you got India, you got Bangladesh, you got Burma, you got Siam, and China. Who knows who else you got up there? And these people can't live peacefully. You know, it's not going to happen. I don't care where you do this. You do the United States, Mexico, and China. They always have their problems. So, and that's not congested in any way like this top of Burma was. And for all intent and purposes, Burma was acting exactly the way they acted in current times, where they mistreat people and they have genocide and they have all that stuff, and people have to flee. You know, recently, I think it was in about 2005 time frame, a Muslim sect had to flee, and they made their refugee camps in Bangladesh, I'm pretty sure. But the point is, you put too many countries together like that, you're asking for trouble. And that's what they got. And the Burmese government was always very military minded. They always considered themselves superior to all their neighbors. And they thought exactly the same when the British came calling. You know, they say, who are these, you know, barbarians? We can't be bothered with these guys, you know, and they hardly took any notice. But eventually they had to, because the Brits were coming to parley, and they were coming to not parley. Actually, they didn't want to do any talking. They came in for some action, and so the Burmese decided that they would have to put up some sort of defense, and there would have to be a war, and so on and so forth. And you know, it's a difficult task to be the invader of a place like Burma, Myanmar, whatever, especially in olden times. You know, you didn't have airplanes to get in on. You didn't have, you know, vast ocean liners that could get you in there. You know, you had difficult transport, and the place itself was difficult. We're talking about a tropical country, you know, with monsoons, with all the infectious diseases that comes along with a wet, humid climate, and that would go on for months. So, you know, at some point the wars would just have to stop, and everybody would sit around, and their supplies and everything would deteriorate, and the men would fall sick, and so you had less men to do the fighting. It was a difficult place. And I believe in the beginning the British weren't doing too good. But, you know, eventually, fast forward, they win eventually. But a lot of setbacks along the way. And the, you know, in my mind, it's just fascinating to read about these places, such as the Irrawaddy River, which bisects Burma north and south, comes out of the mountains up north, which are basically spurs of the Himalayas. It's a very mountainous country, this Burma. At other parts, you know, tropical lowlands, forests, jungle. and I learned a lot reading about this war in Burma. I always thought that the Irrawaddy dumped into Rangoon, which was the city on the port that it does most of the commerce and trade, but actually it doesn't. The mouth of the Irrawaddy is more to the west and a little to the south of Rangoon. But those are two very important but political and geological and commercial pieces of Burma. The river itself is a vast river with many sub-rivers pouring into it. Over the years, I'm sure I've heard, more than once the reference to Mandalay, and but I never really described it as being too real. I always thought it was fictitious, like Shangri-La or some of those places which are more mythical, Mandalay, some very whatever. But I do know now that it is a major city in Burma. Now, back when I was reading, the era that I was reading, it still may have been referred to as Ava. Ava was the historical name for that capital of Burma. And Mandalay was more or less kind of built right over it or right above it. And so maybe that's why I didn't get the Mandalay thing, because people weren't really calling it that. Who knows what they were calling it. But anyway, I do get it now, that Mandalay is like, either a third or more up the river, maybe halfway. And it sits, to me, it looks like it's sitting on the eastern bank. But if you know the way riverbeds of major rivers work, such like, you can think of anyone, the Delaware River, the Hudson River, even the Mississippi River. These rivers, the riverbed is nowadays much lower than it was years ago. So if you look at the sides, the banks of these rivers, they have very, very high elevated banks. And that's the way it seems that Mandalay is on the eastern bank of the river, up high on the bank, probably a couple hundred feet up. It stands the large buildings in the city of Mandalay. So that struck me as a nice thing to know. Yet it's just a repeat. If you go, like I said, you go to the Connecticut River, the Hudson River, Mississippi River, whatever river, you're going to see the same thing. High banks, at least on one side. The river's probably coming down, eating out the opposite shore and leaving the other shore to keep building up as the river eats away at the riverbed. So we see that, and I'm happy to know that, because anything I can learn about Southeast Asia, Burma, whatever, like a little tidbit, like I pick up that at some point during all of this, Britain, I think it was after they decided not to do the East Indian Company anymore, Britain cedes Sumatra to the Dutch. How does a European country of the Nordland come off ceding a large island in Southeast Asia to anybody? Where did they get there? Where did they come off thinking that they have the rights to that island, that they could cede it to somebody else? It's just mind-boggling the way these people saw themselves and what they thought their imperial power was. It's just mind-boggling. You can't be a good person and think that you can cede somebody else's land to yet a third party. You cannot be a good person. You can't. But that's what they did those days. They did it all the time. So in the meantime, the First Burmese War goes, and after some difficulties, the British do prevail, and as they always did, because they had more armor, more power, more well-trained soldiers, and pragmatic generals and all that stuff. People who studied war and weren't just brave men. they were tacticians, and people like the Indian generals and kings, they didn't really study war. Some of them were pretty good at it, you know, and some of them would win quite often. But, end of the day, they weren't trained at Sandhurst or any of those war colleges of the European type. But so I get finished with the Burmese War, first Burmese War, and the next thing you know, the Brits are marching off to the other side of India because they decide they want to wage war in Afghanistan. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, can't they sit still for half a second? No, they got to go off and do battle with Afghanistan, which, comes to find out, they wish they never had, because not only did they have a hard time in Afghanistan, which, as you may know, is way on the other side, northwest, up above current-day Pakistan and into current-day Afghanistan. But not only did they have a hard time of it, they got sent packing. And they were absolutely thrilled to have been sent packing, because there was no chance that as a prisoner of the Afghans that you were going to come out alive. There's no chance. Everybody that wound up being a prisoner there, except in some cases, they were all dead eventually. But at the very end, the Afghan leader felt some compassion, and he did let a bunch of women and children go with, I think, the last contingent of prisoners. But when I'm reading about that, I mean, the names of the cities and the valleys and the mountain ranges, they're all the same that went down a few years ago in our own Iraqi war that, encompassed Afghanistan, Kabul, and all those names that we're more than well familiar with. That there was the same thing going on, and with similar results. Because as far as I know, no country did very well against the Afghans, either in ancient times or our times, including the Russians, including the U.S. They never seemed to do very well, because the Afghans would strike and run. You couldn't catch them, and it seems to me it's still that way today. Don't tell our State Department, because I'm sure they think otherwise. But if you read it, you would think that you're reading, 19, whenever those wars were, the Iraqi wars, and you would think you're right back there again. Now, the other part of all of this is not just, I'm not just reading about the killing history of these countries, but I'm also trying to pay some attention to the I want to call it the philosophical way these people saw their world, and I am expanding that to be not just within India and that Southeast Asian area, but I'm expanding it to wherever I've seen similar philosophical trends. And originally, even years ago, I always was able to make a connection between the high peaks of the Himalayas and the philosophies concerning God and gods and religion, connection to those high peaks. Now, so as I'm thinking about all of that again, I'm adding to that thinking, places like Greece with Mount Olympus. I'm adding places like, where am I thinking? Wherever there were high mountains, people would think the gods were living up there. And so that is essentially the case in the Himalayas with the high peaks. And along with this reading about the religions and the prehistory of India, it, it's becoming and has become very clear to me that way before there was history, humans weren't, sitting around like a bunch of dumb animals. Just because they didn't have writing didn't mean that they weren't thinking. And so, in my mind, and this is coupled with the sources from the things I've been reading, we can go back 10,000, 15,000 years, and we will think that we are starting to see people thinking about God and gods without any ability to write it down and then do some comparative religion or whatever. But whatever their thoughts were, they occupied their mind, and they assumed that what they were thinking was, in fact, correct and real, and they passed it on as this is the way of the world. This is the way the world works. You have the universe, you have these gods, these gods interact with the universe, and they interact with the humans. And this is going on. I'm sorry I can't tell you the other areas of the world besides Greece, Mount Olympus, but this is what we see. We see people over and over making a connection between high elevated places and the suspected living areas of the gods, way up high in the sky, and so on. And from there, they put together their theories, their thoughts, and over thousands of years, these thoughts begin to become habituated in all the people's minds, such that when one ruler who wants to be thought of as a semi-god, starts a religion, all these people with their already habituated minds fall right in step, and they create a religion. All right, and so without any scientific or any other kind of real evidence, these religions come into our lives, and they just come into it because over thousands of years, listening to people talking about this stuff, once again, with no proof, no evidence, nothing, just that they had nothing better to do with their time than to sit around and speculate on the universe, okay? And you and I know that speculation on the universe leads nowhere. Come on. It's ridiculous. But that being said, that's what I think happened. And in the Himalayas, it's been very obvious that they designed their temples after the high peaks of those mountains. Certain shots, you look up a valley or you look out over the distance and you see their steeple-like peaks of the Himalayas, and then you look at one of their temples, and it's almost identical. So the people then cause their gods to and their highest possible beings to inhabit not only the mountains and the skies, but their temples. So this is the long history of how we got to where we got as far as philosophies of religion. And it's a term about this habituation of mind that I picked up from a sociologist during the century. You may have heard me talk about him before, Thorstein Veblen, and he calls it habit of mind. So, and that habit of mind works very well. It seamlessly cuts across the spheres of social, the social fabric, from the religion to the governments. Habit of mind. And the two entities, knowingly or unknowingly, work hand in hand to create this great habit of mind that everybody does what everybody does. And there's no great effort to make it happen because it's been happening for thousands of years. And it's just part of us. You know, the idea of celebration and the idea of sacrifice. It's just part of us. Thousands of years, thousands, and it, so when years ago people were starting to say, I'm an atheist, that was considered to be like one of the worst possible things anybody could say or do. But if you take the time to think about it, it makes sense from this perspective of habit of mind, because I believe we truly don't want to be persons who our mind and minds are working as if in a habit. Oh, this is the way I think. I always think like this. It's the way I think. I don't stop to rethink anything. I don't ask questions. I just have a certain habit of thinking, and that's what I'm going to do. And so, and I believe that if you are a person who's seriously thinking about the world condition, this has to come up and it has to be answered. Are we satisfied with having our 10 billion people simply living off of habit of mind? Or are we not? Would we prefer them to be capable of thinking on their own and seeing what they see and thinking that they're going to continue seeing and believing what they see and not working out a habit of mind? I mean, this is way off topic, but if you're thinking about India, you got to think about this, because that's where they are and what they are. They're people of spiritual living, okay? And you can't avoid this. You cannot. They've been thinking a certain way for thousands of years, and they're habituated in their thought. So, would I want to do anything to counter them and stop them doing what they're doing? No, because I think they have it worked out pretty well, well, live and let live, so on and so forth. But I think for the rest of us, we really need to think. We really need to think. All those things that went on at the end of the BC and then at the beginning of this Common Era, all those things, how much of that was all man-made and just thought up and dreamed up? Using the habit of mind that had been going on for thousands and thousands of years before. Listen, there's only one world, and we should try to get it right rather than speculate it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that, and was there anything else I wanted to talk about this time? Probably not, but I don't know if I'm going to stay on India too much longer. I mean, what else can I say? I talked even a little bit about Burma. And I just don't see me going much deeper with India. There's too much going on in the rest of the world that I'd like to look into and put on this blue bird. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm going to say that India is the most interesting topic of study. Most interesting. If I had the ability to get all the books I would like to get on it, I wouldn't get off of it. But the rest of the world needs being spoken about. Like, for example, in Western Europe was way behind the rest of the world, way behind. And you would think, what the heck, they're way ahead of everybody now. So why were they way behind in the ancient world? Well, recent readings that I'm doing gives me the answer. And the answer is that the places that were ahead of us, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, they had the need for cooperation in a big way, because they had to do major public works in order to grow crops, China as well, grow crops to feed their large population. China, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Near East, well, that's Mesopotamia. And I said India, and I'm trying to think of what were their major public works in India. I don't know, but they had a lot of cooperation going on there too. But in Western Europe, they had such a favorable climate for agriculture, they didn't need to cooperate and build grand canals for irrigation or build, do the what they had to do in the rice growing countries with their terraces. And so all this, the Great Walls, all this stuff was cooperation. And therefore their civilizations had an impetus to grow and become bigger than just mere individual farmers farming a small plot of land, you get a few turnips and a couple of apple trees, which Western Europe did just fine on that platform until their populations and until ideas started to filter in from the East, and of course the invaders from the East. And then they, in turn, started their own large projects and their own need for cooperation, if not just to defend themselves from the invaders from the East. So they start to get their civilization going. And before you know it, they were on the top of the world. And maybe not so much now, and maybe not so much in the future, but at one point they were obviously on the top of the world. Okay, folks, that's it for now. I'll come back and see you again, and hopefully you'll be around to listen to this again. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks for listening.